Some of the best celebrity wines are those that don't even have the celebrity's name on the bottle, like John Bon Jovi's Hampton Water, Miraval, Brangelina, Brad
Yep.
and Angelina. Pink, her Two Wolves wine in California. She kept it a secret. Pink has trained multiple enology courses, helps make the wine, and you'd never know it from looking at the label. Front or back, she's nowhere to be seen. It doesn't make it more authentic, but I think there's an approach, a mindset there that's saying, I'm setting out to make good wine, not just a product line extension, along with my golf set and my oven mitts or whatever.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 149. Why are orange wines in particular appealing to beer drinkers? Why does it pay to be promiscuous when shopping for wine? La la. And why is there so much confusion around natural and raw wine? You'll get those answers and more wine tips in part 2 of my chat with Elizabeth Schneider, host of the Wine for Normal People podcast. If you missed the first part last week, no worries. You can still listen to this one now, but go back and take a listen afterwards, as it was lots of fun. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, links to both of my books, and how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, plus where you can find me on Zoom, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclain.com/149. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, so I'm watching season 2 of The Morning Show with the delightful Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon. I just love watching these two veteran professional women anchor the show with all their flaws and ambition. Reese is actually my favorite because she still has that sort of underlying vulnerability that I'm really drawn to in humans. Now, which wine to pair with the next episode? I think a strong, full-bodied wine that doesn't have a bitter finish, like Amarone. What would you pair with it? Let me know. Okay, on with the show.
We're going to spend the next part of this podcast talking about the wine industry and what is going on. And we're just going to talk about these subjects that are always up for grabs and people are wondering about them. So, number one, Natalie, for $100, do you...
I'm ready.
The natural wine movement, clean wine, raw wine, whatever wine. You talk about it first. I'll chime in after.
Sure. So I think when it comes to natural and raw wine, I think the terms are sometimes used interchangeably. There's a lot of confusion. There's little or no definition. Sometimes they're used as marketing crutches. So there's just baseline, there's a lot of confusion, not a lot of regulation or anything clear cut for consumers. I think the good thing about some of these movements is that it's great if it encourages winemakers to let the land express itself and be guardians of the earth and get consumers looking for winemakers who make wines like that. I know personally, I love drinking unfiltered wines, biodynamic and so on. But I think especially natural and raw wines have become fetishized in some areas like cults or religions. It's almost like the debate over vinyl records versus digital, which is the truest, best sound and all the rest of it. And it just, I've tasted some natural raw wines that were just absolutely horrible, so, wow.
I think that they're confused, these people
Yes.
in the natural wine movement. There's farming.
Yes.
Farming is one thing. I
Mhm.
don't consider an organic or biodynamic wine to necessarily be a natural wine, because when I think about natural wine, I think about the wine making part of it. And that's when I don't want any of that wine usually. Unfiltered wine, there's a lot of unfiltered wines, but I'm talking about people who are not actively pursuing the winemaking process. They're kind of taking it and then saying, we're just going to let the grapes do what they want. Those are not wines that have been shepherded through the winemaking process. I think those don't necessarily taste good. They have a lot of flaws. That's where I have a problem. But I don't understand what the natural wine movement is, because are they talking about farming? Then I'm totally with them. Or are they
Mhm.
talking about this process of making these wines that are flawed? I don't know.
Right. Right. Or even are they talking about just philosophy, a philosophical approach to life and winemaking? For me, natural wine, and there are experts who can correct this, and they probably will when they listen to this podcast. But
They don't listen to this podcast. Don't
oh,
worry.
okay. Okay. We're safe. We're safe. Good. It's on a spectrum. So, as you mentioned, you have organic and biodynamic winemaking, which is just trying to avoid pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all the rest of it. But then it can continue. I think with natural wine, the simplest definition I've seen is nothing is added to or taken away from wine. But I don't know, that seems like,
Risky.
yeah, risky. I mean, sulfites are a wine's friend to stability, shelf stability. Of course, we don't want to over sulfur anything, but unless you have the privilege of living closely to a winery that produces these things, you might be in for something that's really funky and weird, not to your taste. And I don't know, celebrating flaws like they're good things. I don't know, like, especially for the average consumer.
I will admit I like in a Burgundy, like a tiny bit of Brettanomyces, that farmyard thing. I do like a
Right.
little bit of that. But
Sure.
when we go too far in any wine, it gets
Mm.
to be kind of whatever. So this goes into clean wine and celebrity wine, where now all of a sudden you have, who was it? Cameron
Cameron
Diaz.
Diaz.
Oh my gosh, that was just a train wreck. But there are still people buying this wine. Now, there's some celebrities, Kyle MacLachlan, who flies under the radar, and he's
Mm.
got some good wines. There's some other people that are making decent wines who are celebrities. But here's something funny. I heard Drew Barrymore on a podcast saying she doesn't really drink, and now she has a wine.
Right. Sure.
What
So
the
it's
hell?
it's a marketing play. It's a marketing play. It's a brand extension. Again, we're in sync here. I think some of the best celebrity wines are those that don't even have the celebrity's name on the bottle. And I'm not trying to be a purist here, but when I think about like John Bon Jovi's Hampton Water, Miraval, Brangelina, Brad
Yep.
and Angelina, formerly Pink, her Two Wolves wine in California. I mean, you wouldn't even know. And she kept it a secret. Pink has trained multiple enology courses, helps make the wine, and you'd never know it from looking at the label. Front or back, she's nowhere to be seen. It doesn't make it more authentic, but I think there's a motivation and an approach, a mindset there that's saying, I'm setting out to make good wine, not just a product line extension, along with my golf set and my oven mitts or whatever. And so
The George Foreman grill. No, I agree with you, because I
Exactly.
think the most serious known wine, like the biggest one, is Miraval. That would be the best example,
Right.
because they contracted with the Perrin family. Brad Pitt is a serious wine lover. But it is true when these celebrities are like, okay, well, like, here's my wine. And then to not take the courses and not know what you're doing, and then to talk about clean this and that, not good.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, the clean wines are a whole other category of mess, whether it's Cameron Diaz or not. But I think they can be downright misleading. Like some people are treating clean wines like they're self-care, that they are definitely healthier for you. I just want to say, don't be an idiot. If you are trying to get healthy, stop drinking so much wine or stop drinking wine. Like
Right.
clean wines are not good for you. Moderation is good for you.
Right. And that's the other thing, the diet wines, right? The low
Oh.
calorie wines. I mean, wine is not that caloric. You drink an entire bottle of wine and it's less than a burrito from Chipotle. You know what I mean? It's an entire bottle of wine is like 650 calories or something like that. It's 120 calories a glass. It's not that bad. Either do it or don't do it. Okay, now my question for you is alcohol free or no low wines, no or low
Right.
alcohol wines. obviously the wines of Germany and cooler climates are going to have naturally lower alcohol levels because the grapes are less ripe or there's sugar in the wine. But what do you think about these alcohol-free Ariel and free and blah, blah,
Right.
blah?
Okay, so again, one little caveat. They're good for those who don't want to drink or designated drivers or can't drink, whatever. So great. I'm glad there's a product that looks like you're having wine. If that's what you want socially, it can be poured in a wine glass. But alcohol is the scaffolding that holds wine together, right? It carries flavor. It adds body. It's unnatural to take alcohol out of wine.
Right.
It is a less natural wine. And especially when you get into spinning cones and all kinds of other things. To your point, I love naturally low wines. German Riesling. There's a winery in New Zealand. I think it's called The Doctors. And his Sauvignon Blanc is like 8-9%. And what he's done is left the canopy on like the leaves on the vines so that there's not as much sun getting through to ripen the grapes, because if ripening grapes, more sugar, more alcohol. It's a direct math equation. So I love those natural methods because the flavors will develop. But, when it comes to light wine, alcohol-free wine, and all the rest of it, if people, again, are looking for something that has the flavor, they're not going to get it. If they're just going for fewer calories, sometimes they don't even realize calories come from both alcohol and sugar. So sometimes you can get this low alcohol wine, but what they've done is just traded it off for more sugar. And you're actually not saving on calories.
We had a conversation about this on my Patreon page about the no and low alcohol wines. And it's like, wine is not a good product to do no alcohol with because of your exactly excellent point about the scaffolding. Spirits are way better to do this with because there's already so much sugar in mixed drinks and there's so much more alcohol in spirits that you can replace it with sugar or some sort of sugared-like product, and that will satisfy in a way, right? If you're not looking for the buzz. So it works for spirits, but it does not work for wine, in my opinion, at all.
And then consumers come across to the wine category expecting they're going to get the same taste experience because they did with their spirits, and they're not. And Elizabeth, like when I taste a wine that's 14% alcohol versus 13 versus even 12, there's a huge difference in the body and the taste. 1% makes a huge difference. So
sometimes if a winemaker is very good, it can be high alcohol and the balance is there so you can't taste it. But many times, you're right, you can absolutely taste the heat. Speaking of heat, climate change in various places. What do you think is going to happen here? I mean, is Canada our future for big Cabernet?
Come and move up. Join us, Elizabeth.
I looked into it at one point and it's so expensive. There's just no way. You all make it very hard for Americans to come up there.
Sorry about that.
You don't want us.
We do. I heard an expression. It's not so much global warming as global weirding. We're getting these extreme weather events. So even apart from the wildfires, which are crazy, we're getting these extremely high temperatures or hail when we shouldn't, when the spring bud break is so critical for the vines, or frosts that come out of nowhere. So in terms of what's happening, I do see a move northward, like what is a viable range of wine growing is, just as they're starting to make wine in Scotland. So yeah, sure, Canada, but BC, for example, their major wine region is the last 30 miles of the Sonoran Desert. It is blazing hot there already, and the wildfires are affecting them as well as the western coast of the United States. So I guess, I don't know, I have to move up, way up. I don't know what's going to happen, but there's going to be lots of changes to wine styles, the kind of grapes that work, the variety. I wonder if that'll suffer, but certainly prices. I think there'll be an impact on prices going up.
My concern, and I've been saying this for a long time, is in a place like Napa, where they're so concerned with economics, that they're not taking the proper steps that they need to make the change before the stuff really hits the fan. It's concerning because you see in Bordeaux, they're planning a lot for what's going to happen. They've had a lot of foresight there, but I don't see that kind of proactive behavior in especially Napa and somewhat Sonoma. It worries me for U.S. wine, but I haven't been there in a really long time. And when I did go to BC, and people who've listened to this podcast I actually got the most hate mail I've ever gotten from a podcast
Oh, no.
from when I did the BC episode.
Surely it couldn't have come from
It
Canadians.
all came from
Are
Canadians.
we supposed to be nice?
I know.
Why
was
why
shocked.
were they doing that?
But look, I went on a trip that was sponsored by the Wines of BC, and they sent me to a lot of wineries that were not very serious wineries, I would say. And unless you go to some of the selected cherry-picked areas in Oliver and Osoyos, you're not going to get always the best stuff. And some of it is tourist wine. But I do think I need to go back there because I think there's changes and I think it's getting better. What about orange wines? And then you and I were talking about this blue wines. What on earth? That came out of Portugal, right? Or Spain a couple of years ago?
Yeah, it was Spain first. And then there was a Vindigo from France. Wink, wink. There's even now purple wine, Elizabeth, out of Australia. It's just...
Wine isn't purple from Australia already? I mean, isn't it already purple because of all the extraction?
This is dyed purple with botanicals and weird stuff. And anyway.
Lord.
But what gets me is they're marketing it too as more a healthful drink because they're avoiding additives, but they're adding this purple botanicals anyway. But orange wines, of course, what's old is new. That's one of the most ancient styles of winemaking. As we know, it goes back to Georgia, the country, not the state, thousands of years ago. And so it's all coming back again, like long lapels. I don't know, but it's
bell bottoms.
Yeah, exactly. So, I haven't tasted thousands of orange wines, but of the ones I've tasted, I'm kind of like 50-50 maybe in terms of the ones that I like. And they can be something more unusual for your palate. Even though I grew up with beer and whiskey, I didn't drink because I found it all bitter, because later I found out I was a super taster and very extreme sensitivity to bitterness. But with orange wines, you get sort of that hybrid, I find. It can be a beer drinker's wine. Like some of them taste like IPA ales or something. Yep. I'm probably saying it wrong, but that nice bitter, that sort of tea, herbs. So I like some of them. And I like the ones that are trying to offer something authentically, to use an overused word, and not just some marketing hook. Hey, it's orange.
Yeah, I think that the big trend behind it is sort of died out. I think natural wine is about to see that too, because the definitions are dicey. And I think orange wine might be a little dicey too, because all it is skin contact wine.
Right.
So the thing that they forgot to tell people is that a lot of white wine has skin contact. They have a couple hours of skin contact for something like a Gewürztraminer. How else are you going to get those flavors from the skins? So for things that are light amounts of skin contact, I think that adds to, especially Pinot Grigio, because you need that. But then these extreme versions, again, it goes back into that. The orange wine, natural wine stuff is tied together somewhat. And then they just go, everybody's got to go to this extreme thing. And then I think the real thing that kills me, and this goes to our next topic, which is the wine critics, influencers thing. Someone tells somebody that this is the wine you have to drink and everything else is crap. And then because we've done this horrible thing in the wine industry, which is undermine everyone's confidence that they know what they're talking about, that then people are like, yeah, what you said. Or it just becomes something like you feel that you should like it, or maybe you do like it, but then you decide that that's the thing you like and you don't like anything else, which is really limiting.
Sure. So I think, again, we've seen lots of pendulum swings from the heyday of Robert Parker, the U.S. critic, who's just sort of really popularized the 100-point scale score
Did you ever
for
meet
wines.
Him?
I talked to him on the phone,
what was he like?
But not in person. He was nice.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
He was very factual. He was a lawyer by training, so he had a sharp mind and was very blunt, but not rude, like just very to the point. Boom, boom, boom. And so you had the rise of single critic, single name, then you had panel tastings and so on. And then you get this swing to everybody's a critic, starting with, again, the bloggers. And now we've moved to the influencers and, what is a critic? Who should you trust? And so on. And then into that blend, we've added, again, I think, misogyny, because a lot of the wine influencers tend to be women taking beautiful pictures and then they get chased for not knowing wine. But I think, I step back and look at all of this because it's kind of a tangle as well. But I think the more voices, the better, especially if we can bring people to the category, because, wine is under attack from hard seltzers, which we can also talk about. But I guess it's just a matter of what is your taste? Find someone you trust who recommends wines that make you happy. And whether you get that from a pretty picture on Instagram or a score from Robert Parker back in the day, that's fine.
That's definitely true. But the thing that I hear from people is, in some ways, this shelf talker and the number was so much easier. And now, who do you trust and what do? You do review wines, and that is incredibly helpful. I don't do that. It's too much for me to handle, and it's not my passion. So I can recommend a wine. I generally recommend regions and then exploring them. But it's hard when you're at the shelf level to decide. And then we all know it's been like the emperor has no clothes, that some of the stuff's been exposed. We know that some of this stuff is pay for play. We know that some of it is you line up 50 bottles of Cabernet. What does the 50th one get at the end? It doesn't get a whole lot of attention, right? Plus, if you went to school and there was no fine gradation between what a C was and what an A was, it's where we are, right? There's no C's. Nobody gives out C's.
There's no C's.
If you have a 90 point, if you have a 100-point scale, it's meaningless because the first 85 numbers are not given.
They're not relevant. And there's two sides to that. So any liquor store is going to try to sell every wine they like. So what they do is they go shopping for scores and find the highest scores. And not all consumers are aware that just because it says 98 from so-and-so may not mean much.
Sometimes it's from somebody's cat, frankly, is what you're trying to say. Like my dog, Ellie, says that wine is awesome. You can find a score from anything. There are people that'll score anything. They will. And it doesn't matter. You look at the names and you're like, wow, that's interesting. I've never heard of that. That's because it's like the owner's cat.
Yeah. So consumers, what happens? They learn not to trust scores. I don't know. And then you think, well, is it such a big deal? It's a bottle of Shiraz, but we all work so hard at different jobs. I'm not just talking about what we do as wine writers, but everyone works hard these days. And why? For those times when you can relax, whether it's with family, over dinner, whatever, with a good bottle. So I do think it's important that consumers can trust some guidance. Yeah, it's not, you don't lose your investment portfolio from bad advice, but I mean, what's the point if you can't have pleasure in life and trust some advice to get that pleasure?
If they can't find a review from you, which they should go on nataliemclean.com and look.
Thank you.
If they can't, then go to a wine store where you have found that they usually have good wines that you like. And don't be monogamous. Don't ever just pick one wine shop. That's the worst idea possible because then you get stuck into their palate. But there's lots of different places. But I think that's where we're moving. We're moving toward who's got the taste and who's going to push you out of your comfort zone. And I think that matters. I think selection matters too.
Absolutely.
Is there a lot of stuff?
Exactly. So we're going full circle again to pre-Robert Parker. How did people make decisions? They talked to their local merchant or else a friend recommended a bottle. There was less invested in trust in scores and so on. So
is that so bad?
A good thing. No, it's probably a good thing because then there's at least a conversation beyond a number because people will look and say, oh, 94 for this Beaujolais, but they hate light wines. So that 94 should be meaningless, but you don't know that if you don't know what wine style that is. You just see the 94 must be good. Ooh, I don't like it. I guess these numbers don't mean anything.
So I had this big wine store that was great for me because I think if you didn't know what you were doing, the staff there was only one guy that really knew what he was doing. And I think you'd really get lost in there. But there was a guy, I remember one day going in there and he had the Wine Spectator Top 100 with a shopping cart. And he's just going through being like, you got this one, you got this one, you got this. I was like, no, oh my gosh, this is a disaster. Why? You know what I mean? And that shop certainly wasn't going to be able to help him. They're just looking for the wines. They're not going to be able to guide him or ask him what he wants because they didn't know. So I think I like this personal. I think that's a good thing, frankly.
I think so too.
Get guided, learn about wines from people like us, and then get guided and then go find the places that sell the good stuff, the good versions.
Absolutely. I think wine and books are very similar in that they're long tail categories. There's just thousands, hundreds of thousands of choices. And in the early days, when someone wrote a book, they would go around to these small little groups and do book readings. And now we're into Zoom and massive everything. But I think it's going to return both wine and books to the very personal, small acolytes and trust. I do think that would be a good thing.
Honesty. You did mention wine and White Claw and spirits and the shrinking of the wine market. So I want to hear your opinion about that, because I love the wine trade is constantly like, the wine industry's dying. They pronounce it. How many times in the last, I've been in this for 15 years, how many times they say the wine industry's dead? A million. Every single year.
Yeah.
The wine industry's dead every year. This 8,000-year-old beverage is going away.
Yeah, exactly. Just like the dinner party is dead year after year after year after year.
Yeah, that's always dead. Yeah.
That's always dead. Whether it's White Claw or the other hard seltzers, they've got a lot of advantages. They taste good. They're easy. They don't require a special implement to open them. You can port them easily to the park, especially when glass isn't allowed. You don't need a vintage chart. I mean, I sound like I'm selling White Claw here, but I think the wine industry can take a big lesson from that. So I do applaud canned wines, wine spritzers, anything that can get and keep people in the industry. It's not a bad thing if people want to drink hard seltzers, but I hate to see wine losing out because it's locked itself up in some tower of all of this other stuff, the packaging, the implements to open it, the ceremony and the sniffing and the glassware and everything else, when there's so much pleasure to be had from wine. But yeah, it's a wake-up call, and those who heed it are going to survive, and those who don't will have their lunch drunk on them.
Canned wines have come so far. At first, I was super against them because they tasted horrible. You know, when you taste a Budweiser, which tastes terrible anyway, but you could taste the metal in the can.
Oh,
well, I learned from Bridge Lane Lieb on Long Island, because they do a lot of canned wine, that they have worked so hard on the liners to make sure. And so now I have come around on canned wines. At first, I was like, if it's going to taste bad and it's convenient, that's not helping. But now that they've figured that out, and I have had some good canned wines, I don't generally buy them just because, honestly, they're not great value. I mean, let's be honest. And I drink enough wine, so I'm generally having it in bottles. But I wish that better wine came in boxes, frankly.
Oh, yes. Well, boxes have so many advantages. I mean, the environmental footprint alone is like half of bottled wine. So you get, those 3-liter boxes. I'm doing the wrong measurement here, but it's equal to 4.
That's right.
Yeah?
3 liters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it comes 3 liters, and then now they're starting to make 1.5 liter boxes, and that's more in the UK. They call them Card Bordeaux.
Card Bordeaux. I love that.
Or Bagnums. Bagnums is the other thing. Yes.
That's great. But, there's so many advantages. I mean, it's the best wine preservation system on the market. So as that bag gets drained from Le Spigot, it shrinks, and it's an airtight seal. It's so good. It's easier to port, not just for consumers, but for wineries to ship. So you get into the lower environmental stuff going on. But now better and better wines are coming in boxes. And I mean, like if you still got hangups about serving your friends boxed wine, decant it into a fancy decanter in the kitchen. Who will know? What goes on in the kitchen stays in the kitchen. We've got to get over it like we had to get over screw caps.
And screw caps, they're the greatest thing ever.
Yes.
But canned wines and boxed wines have huge potential. I still don't think the wines are quite good enough, at least the stuff that's available here in box. But it's really interesting. I did a research project, again, because I'm all about research, about transportation. So the biggest environmental impact in wine is actually not on the farm, it's transportation. And you're exactly right. One of the hugest problems about wine bottles, and actually there's a winery in Uruguay that's trying to overcome this, is the space between the bottles. So how much waste, because you've got to pack them so they don't break. They're round. Yes. So if you have square boxes, you can really pack stuff in there. You're packing a lot more wine. So this winery is actually making flat plastic bottles. They've got the longer neck, but you can stack them. So you can get many more per box, and they're much lighter weight. So it makes a lot of sense to do something like that. That kind of innovation we're not seeing. I mean, they've got flasks, right? We could put wine in sort of a nicer flask. You could still do it with glass if you're worried about the plastic flavor. But there's not that innovation going on, and I wish there were.
Absolutely. And I've heard that there's somebody making flat bottles that will fit inside a standard mail envelope slot. So you can mail them like they must be plastic. Great. You could send them like an envelope of wine. That would be awesome.
It may be the same winery, because they are really pioneering that, and they are going full throttle on it. I think it's a great idea. I think glass is a sustainable thing if you can find someone to recycle it. But that's the other problem, at least in the United States. A lot of places are no longer recycling colored glass. And communities don't know that. People don't know that. You put it in the recycling bin and it goes in the landfill. Now, there are some, I'm fortunate that I live in a community where they do actually put it back in the roads and stuff like that. But there are plenty that don't do that. And so thinking through, what could you recycle? What could you do to reduce the amount of glass or to make it easier so that you can fit more stuff? And when things are flying in planes, recognizing that sometimes that has to happen, or going in cars, that you're fitting 24 bottles versus 12 inside of a case. I think that'd be very cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So many advantages. Yeah. Makes sense.
Natalie, you are a gem. I've taken up way too much of your time. Thank you for sharing your insights. You're awesome. I'm so glad that we've become friends over this pandemic year. Someday we will meet in person.
We definitely will meet, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for asking me not only to talk with you, but to open up for the first time on that issue. And I cannot wait. We absolutely need to get together for a glass or three.
A bottle or three? I don't know.
Yeah, something. I don't care if it's flat, if it's round. We just need to.
Yeah, let's do a box or whatever, right? You are awesome. And I appreciate you. I think you are fantastic and you have a lot of courage. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about this. I think you're just a fantastic person. And I really appreciate you. So thank you so much. And we're looking forward to your next book, which you're working on and will come out eventually. But in the meantime, why are you not promoting the old books? I mean, like, I'm got to get back into that promo
thing. So good. Yeah.
All right. And if you want to take Natalie's classes also, you can find that on her site too. So with that, this has been another episode of Wine for Normal People. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Elizabeth Schneider. In the show notes, you'll find a link to the full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online food and wine pairing class, links to both my books, and where you can find me on Zoom, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/149. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Felicity Carter, the executive editor at PixWine, a global wine discovery platform. She was previously editor-in-chief of Menninger's Wine Business International magazine for 12 years, and her work has appeared in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, The Guardian, and Decanter, among others. Felicity has a delightfully wide range of interests, having also written about astrology, oil and gas, the funeral industry, and skateboarding for boys. As a romance novel editor, her main editorial note was, quote, "This is not physically possible," end quote. I just love my chat with her, and she'll join us from her home in Germany. In the meantime, if you missed episode 60, go back and take a listen. I chat with Mark Oldman, the wine world's greatest showman. He is so entertaining. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
One really cool thing to do, which wine snobs do, and that telegraphs that you're an insider, is they'll take an empty glass and smell their empty glass. And why are they doing that, Natalie?
Because, Mark, you told me they're looking for impurities, right?
Exactly. They're looking
for detergent. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It will intimidate the restaurant because they'll be, they're going to have a really bad English accent suddenly. Hey, we've got a serious wine snob in the house. Treat this person very well. And especially these wine-oriented restaurants, they will take notes on you. And when you reserve again at the restaurant, we've got that insider. Even if you're the butcher's third cousin, you're still in the business and they're going to treat you extra well. So sniff your empty glass and you will telegraph that you're in the business, even if you're not.
If you liked this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wine trends we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a wine that you like, naturally. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.